Hi everyone, Sandman here. Here's the second part of Karen's talk from last night, called Are Men Obsolete? Just a warning, this is a fairly long question and answer period. One particular person in the audience made Karen Straughan very passionate when she said that all spaces were effectively male spaces. I'd also like to thank the people that decided to support CAFE, the Canadian Association for Equality. I'm sure that they're going to appreciate your support. Now sit back and enjoy the video, and tomorrow my regular videos will be back discussing MGTOW related issues. Cheers.
Okay, so I think what we're going to do is move into questions, and if you have any, come to the microphones that have been set up in the middle of the room. We have folks we know in the overflow area downstairs. Your questions will be sent to me via one of my colleagues downstairs, so give them to him. You probably are being told that right now, and they'll get to me. And if we have people who are following us on live streaming, again, they're encouraged to tweet or post comments or questions using hashtag men's issues at Ryerson U or at Equality Canada or some combination of those. And Steve, will you be letting Karen and I know about those questions?
I'm trying to highlight them as they come up.
Okay.
But,
right great. Okay, well, we'll start with the questions here and in the overflow, and then just let us know, okay, Steve, how that's going, please.
Thanks for speaking, Karen.
Oh, thank you.
I'm just curious as to which tactics you found in the... Like, I imagine there's a lot of people that are interested in true gender equality and just really haven't considered the notion that men face issues as well as women face issues, and that therefore, they're pretty dismissive of men's rights. What tactics have you found in the past have sort of convinced these, fair-minded but ideological people of the need for men's rights?
I actually I don't see trying to convince feminists as being useful at all. You can if you're going to have a debate between yourself and a feminist or feminists who are ideologically driven, right? Like not just coffee shop feminists who believe men and women should be equal, but they don't really know anything about the baggage that comes along with the sort of the set of theories and the complex of philosophies. If you're going to do that, what you're doing is you always engage them in a public space, right? And try and make sure that there's a recording of it. So either it's on the internet or there's footage or there's something, right? Or that other people are watching, especially if there's an opportunity for them to watch again or to read it again, because you're not there to convince the feminist. It's sort of like how when you have a young Earth creationist, right, and you explain scientifically how Noah's Ark has to be just a metaphor or something like that, because it couldn't actually happen, right? Just genetic diversity proves that it couldn't actually happen when it supposedly happened, and they will come up with these extremely convoluted, bizarre ways of explaining how it really, like they will not change their original axiom, right? They will not, they just won't do it, right? And so you're there to convince everybody who's watching, right? And that means that you need to make your points coherently, not get too mad. You can call them an idiot if they're really being an idiot, but you keep that kind of thing to a minimum. Don't be hostile, right? You may really want to be hostile with the person you're talking to, but there are other people watching. There's always other people, and you're hoping that there are other people watching, and they're the ones who are going to be convinced by a reasoned, calm, rational argument. So there you go. That's basically what my strategy, and that's what I think probably works for me most of the time. So
Thank you.
no problem.
Hi, Karen. First of all, thanks a lot. Great lecture, hearing from you here in Toronto. Just something I've been wondering about for the last little while. This is an issue I raised at Dr. Brown's lecture back in, I think it was November, talking about men as teachers, and I'm just wondering, is there much hope left for men who want to work in fields like education or even the corporate world? And the reason I ask that is because it seems like after reading Warren Farrell's book, The Myth of Male Power, he brought up issues such as Men, for instance, can't even have a calendar in their cubicle as an example of let's say, women in bikinis, because some women might see that and think, oh my God, that's sexual harassment, I don't like it, and then that leads to new laws, and it starts driving men out of the workforce. And then with this increased, I guess, feminization of the workplace, do you think maybe men are going to just become naturally more and more inclined to enter into the jobs that you were mentioning at the beginning, like power and so on and so forth? And could we see a drop of men working in what are so-called white-collar jobs as a result?
I think that sort of it's an accelerated effect, and it isn't because men don't like women. It really isn't. Men will automatically change their behavior and the way they talk to be more courteous, more polite when there's a woman around, right? They're much more mean to each other. I mean, like, even when you're talking about abuse and nasty comments and harassment and stuff online, women, the issue's getting attention now because women are online now and starting to suffer from it. But statistically, men are still more likely to receive threats of death, violence, vandalism, in all media, even over the phone. And, so, I mean, this has always been an issue, right? We only care about it now because it's happening to women. And then it'll be classified as misogyny, right, when it's something that happens more often to men. So I think that because there's those changes of behavior demanded of men when there are a lot of women in an environment, and I mean, it's not going to be in one of those male-dominated professions where 5% of the workers are women, because they're there because they like the masculine atmosphere, right? And so they're not going to be it's when it gets to about 30-40% women, and then everything starts to change. The environment starts, the demands on men communication-wise, and the restrictions all start to increase. And yeah, it will drive a lot of men out of those kinds of jobs. Not all of them. I think, we still have, if you look at nursing, it's like heavily female dominated. We still have men who feel suited to the environment there. I think I've heard a lot of them talk about how they have a tough time there with the social dynamics, but they like their work, it's worth it to them, right? So yeah, I think that that's probably, I can predict that gender segregation in the workplace is going to get bigger, not smaller, so yeah.
We have a question from the overflow room.
Oh.
If I may borrow this for a moment. The question is, the questioner says, young children just want to play and at and before a certain magical age are innately equal. I believe children's behavior is a huge key to understanding humanity. The question is, having children yourself, Karen, and being witness to this, can you give me some idea of what they are doing that we can incorporate into the adult world?
Well, the problem, I think, there is that kids haven't formed a worldview yet, and so they are very, very open to new experiences, new ideas. They're fearless in a lot of ways, and once they become adults, I mean, like, it really is sort of like you can't teach an old dog new tricks. You have your set of ideas, you have your psychological schema that you use to interpret the world, and that's pretty much nailed down, right? I mean, you're developing all. That's why kids are having adventures and they're being really open to experience. It's because they're sorting out the wheat from the chaff, right? As far as how the world works, right? Once you get to be an adult, it's like I don't know. Maybe get a brain injury, because like I really don't. I think adults could learn a lot of things from kids, but I don't think that they're necessarily capable of it. So, go ahead.
Hi.
Hi.
So I'm a student at Ryerson, and first of all, I just wanted to say thank you for coming in and speaking today.
Thanks.
Earlier today, the Ryerson Student Union sent out an email, and I'm not going to go into the multiple paragraphs of content of what they said.
Is it very wordy?
It is.
Oh,
But what I will say is, and be mindful, I am quoting the student union. They're saying, we share the university's goal to promote freedom of expression. I'm quoting them. I'm saying this without irony. I'll start again since I was so rudely interrupted. We share the university's goal to promote freedom of expression, but recognize that freedom of speech comes with the responsibility to ensure that student safety is prioritized. So, what I'd like to know is, given this comment,
how would there be any concern for student safety if they just left us alone?
Well, that was my question.
Oh wait, it's because words and ideas can be violent and unsafe. I think that's probably what they're getting at there. I hear so often that men's rights people are promoting violence against women, right? That we're promoting, and we have, or a Voice for Men, right, promotes violence against women. And if you make an even remotely violent comment on that website, it gets deleted. You get maybe one warning if it wasn't that bad, and then you're gone, right? They don't put up with that there, right? It calls to violence, incitement to violence. And one of the things that I found most ironic was ABC was going to do an episode of 2020 on A Voice for Men, and had interviewed Paul Elam, the website owner. And they did a preliminary online article written by a couple of women. I think they were maybe interns or something, or research people, right? And they wrote this article about how, A Voice for Men is so horrible, and, women are fighting misogyny online and blah, blah, blah. They're fighting back against it. And they scooped a comment from the website. And the comment was 3-4 years old, right? And the only possible place they could have got, and they presented it as indicative of what you would find at that website. And the only place they could have gotten it was he had copied and pasted it in an article telling people, if you leave comments like this, you're out of here, right? Okay? And they presented it as if it was indicative of what you are going to normally find on that website. And so, the level of dishonesty is just staggering. It's absolutely stunning. It's and I've been subject to some lovely disinformation campaigns as well, so that's been fun. So, yeah, there you go. What are you going to do? Ideas are dangerous. So, go ahead.
Yeah, hi Karen. Thanks for coming this evening to speak with us.
Hi.
I just wanted to ask, I've been more thinking about things I've read about more the mainstream media being sort of the feminine view of things, or appealing at least to the feminine view. And there's been more growth in things like Tom Likas or the Rational Male, the aspects like that, or Drew, forget his name, Aaron Clary.
Yeah, no, I like him. And, Captain Capitalism.
Yeah. Do you see more things moving more that way if the mainstream is refusing, or like you say, National Post, Barbara Kay's article being published kind of shamed,
yes.
may have shamed the actions today. Do you see more of that happening where the push becomes too great, where more males will just find their own way, their own productions?
I suspect that what's probably happening is that there are, we're people, like our philosophical opponents, try to present this movement as completely male, and if they can get away with it, they'll say it's completely straight white male, right? Because the straight white male is the only person left in society that you're allowed to hate. And so they try it, but more and more people are beginning to see that there are women involved, that there are gay and trans people involved, that there's people of every ethnicity and race and sometimes religion, right? That really, it's an extremely diverse movement, and it's probably more diverse than the mainstream of feminism, ironically. And so I think when the mainstream starts seeing that, because the female focus that you see in the mainstream media isn't even necessarily an attempt to appeal to women. I think it's actually more based on an attempt to never offend women, right? And and then so when you have a panel, like a couple weeks ago, I was at a conference called freedomschool.ca or something like that. But I had sort of been invited just sort of on the spur of the moment to speak on a panel with Janice Fiamengo and a few other ladies about political correctness, right? And I talked about my anti-feminism, and I talked about how I raise awareness of men's issues and, talk about masculinity in the culture and blah, blah, blah. And all of these people whose primary concern is freedom, liberty, right? Get the government to stop telling us what to do when we're not harming anyone. Right? They were extremely receptive, right? Extremely receptive. And even, talking to the lady on the plane on the way here, she's maybe 75, something like that. And I was talking about this talk, and I was talking about what I do and the research I do and all of this stuff. And she didn't seem offended at all. I think whether it's just having a woman speak it or whether it's the fact that maybe things have gotten so bad, people are starting to notice on their own. And so when you tell them, it's not just like some alien thing, it's not like telling them the sky's green. So maybe, I don't know. It's really hard to say. So, all right.
We have had some people waiting downstairs. Attila, do you mind if we do one from the overflow? Okay, so here we go. Just get to it. So he asks, could you dig a bit deeper into the difference between coffee shop feminists and ideological feminists?
Oh, where do I even start? I would say coffee shop feminism is it's the belief that men and women should be equal. They may have a different definition of equal than the next person, right? Equality of opportunity, equality of outcome. Equal representation in government. Does that mean that politicians care as much about men and women, or as women, or is it that you have to have equal numbers of women in politics? So, they'll have different ideas, but they're not generally ideologically radical. A lot of them don't even really know what the kind of stuff that's taught in women and gender studies. They hear about the patriarchy, right? But it's not something that really concerns them on any kind of. It's not something that they feel like they have to smash, right? They don't feel oppressed necessarily. That's what a coffee shop feminist is. A ideological, or I guess you could say radical, but I think that the mainstream is quite plenty like this as well. They rely on conceptual models of how the world works and sort of power dynamics in society to decide what the problem is and what the solutions should be, right? And what the goals should be, right? So they have a huge ton of just ideological baggage and philosophical wackiness and all of these intellectual tools, so that they can actually say that a man who gets falsely accused of domestic violence and goes to jail and loses his kids during the divorce, right, and never sees them again because he didn't have any due process rights, they can turn around and say that's sexism against women, right? Okay, and it's actually caused by misogyny, right? And so, I kid you not, I've had, that's actually the patriarchy that we're trying to destroy. And it's like they think that if they just smash the patriarchy, that men's problems are going to magically go away, and that's not the case, because as far as I'm concerned, they have the causality backwards, right? The patriarchy, the fact that you have politically male-dominated society and father-led families is not what caused gender roles and the way we view men and women differently and all of those things. It wasn't the cause. They have the cause backwards. The way men and women are and the way we view men and women is the reason and why our society was patriarchal. And it has sort of naturally changed a great deal. I think that if feminism had never existed, we'd pretty much be almost where we are now anyway. So there you go. Go ahead, Attila.
Karen, I'm very thankful that you do the work that you do. It is an invaluable component to the well-being of men and boys. I want to share with you an actual incident that happened to, I have two boys, 11 and 13 years old. This actually happened to my eldest son, who's in grade 8. He was in the schoolyard playing. A grade 1 girl walked up to him, slapped him across the head, and said, "You are not allowed to hit girls. You cannot hit me back." I'd like to.
Well, at least she was being honest. And an adult woman who would do that would probably find a way to turn herself into the victim. So,
Two parts here. One, I wanted to share this actual event. I have found that my boys are having a real difficulty at school.
yeah.
Very inhospitable. My eldest son has been targeted by a number of events that actually, one of them led to a criminal charge based on false information. But the question I have for you is, what can parents, what can boys do to avoid being trapped in this condition? Like, what should my son have done?
The really horrible thing is what I told my son. He was about 6, and they'd plowed the parking lot at the complex where I live, and they'd piled up all of this packed chunks of snow, right, all in a big pile at the end of the parking lot. And he was up there with a girl from the neighborhood when he should not have been. And she tried to push him off. And this is a fairly tall, about 10 feet tall pile of snow, right? And so he skidded down, right, sort of on his bum, right, hurt himself a little bit. And then he threw a piece of this snow up at her because he was mad, right? And I think he had every right to be mad. And when he came in and he told me about it, he was really upset because he was scared that he was going to get really seriously hurt. And I actually told him, right, you be really, really careful what you do when you're around girls, because I still might get her mother at my door, right, to give me heck for you throwing that at her daughter, right? Like, it's not fair. It's just not, right? But you have to be aware of what other people are going to think. I know she was in the wrong. You know she was in the wrong. But any outsider coming in is going to assume that you were the aggressive one, that you were in the wrong. And it's just a fact of life that you're going to have to deal with until we can figure out a way to change it. I mean, like, that's the really sad thing, is that you just have to disabuse your kid at age 6 of any sense of fairness or justice, right, or equal treatment. You have to tell him. I mean, like, that little girl who hit your son, it's the most honest thing she could say. I mean, everything she said was true.
Yeah, what astounded me is I wondered, how would a 6-year-old child learn this concept?
Oh, they know. They know.
But
I mean,
where?
they see domestic violence commercials too, and and it's never okay to hit a woman, and maybe they heard it from their father when their brother was, poking them, or you don't hurt girls, right? I mean, like, or their mom. It's pervasive. We teach our values to our kids. I mean, like, my dad, the only time he ever raised his voice with me was when I wasn't respecting my mother. So.
Thank you, Karen.
Thanks.
Hi, Karen.
Hi.
Thank you very much for coming here this evening.
Oh, no, you too.
My question is sort of along in the same veins. I wanted to know what you can do as a parent to encourage your children to have to be very mindful of equality, and what kind of parenting tactics we can do to nurture that sort of thinking.
I think as much as possible, you treat your kids equally, right? Whether they're boys or girls, as much as possible. And that doesn't necessarily mean coddling your boys. It means telling your girls that they are wearing big girl pants, right? And that there's just no way you can go around hitting people, right? And frankly, if somebody hits you back, right? If you hit a boy and he hits you back, you deserved what you got. Right, like, that is what you should tell your girls. And it's the girls that we're going to have to educate, I think, even more than the boys, because you can educate the boys and raise them a certain way only so much, because society still doesn't fit them, right, the way it fits girls, right? So that's what I would do, and be really honest with your boys, right? Just because I have this opinion that if she hits you, I would be fine with you hitting her back. Your teacher's not going to feel that way. Your principal's not going to feel that way. You're going to be the one who gets in trouble. So There you go. Yes?
Hi. Sorry. Hi. First of all, I want to address. I'm a Ryerson student.
Mm-hmm.
I just wanted to address that. It's funny that you call Naomi Wolf a feminist when she's actually a rape apologist, and basically blame the victims of Julian Assange's rape. So she's actually not really a feminist at all.
Who?
Naomi Wolf. You mentioned her in the beginning.
She actually, as far as I'm concerned, she says she's a feminist, and
She says she is, but she's a rape apologist.
I don't know about that. Being skeptical is not rape apology.
Okay. You also said that men deserve a safe space on campus, but I would have to say that every space in society is actually a safe space for men. Men don't get catcalled when they walk down the street. I'm sorry, whenever I'm an openly gay student, whenever I fucking walk down the street, people yell at me, okay? Why? Because men like to catcall women. If I wear a short skirt, I get harassed when I walk down the street.
Catcalls are good.
No, they're not good. I'm saying, is it the world safe space for women? No. Women deserve a safe space on campus. Queer people deserve a safe space on campus. Trans people deserve a safe space on campus.
Groups exist because of that, right?
You mean enough? Why do men need a safe space on campus?
Why do men need a safe space? Because the very idea of an event where men are talking about men's issues in a non-sanctioned manner, right, by the powers that be, right? In other words, they don't have feminists puppeting them, right, pulling their strings, telling them what to say, okay, or they don't have feminist ideology to do it, okay? When that happens, then you have what happened at the Warren Farrell protest. I don't know if you watched the footage of that, right? But if I were one of the men who was trying to attend an event talking about male suicide and all kinds of other stuff, and I had some woman who knows she can get away with it up in my face, calling me every name in the book, screaming at me, I don't think I'd feel very safe, right? Okay? And frankly, men are the majority of victims of public sphere violence.
I'm not saying that any of those statistics or male suicide, any of that stuff exists, because it does. Men are the victims of more workplace violence, workplace suicides, low enrollment rates. That said, that's not systematic oppression in society.
Really? I think that when a 6-year-old girl can hit another child and get away with it and never ever have to suffer retaliation because he's a boy, okay? I think that's systematic. How? Because if the system intervenes and punishes the boy for hitting back, right? It's systematic.
Because we hear the same argument. What, you're saying that it should be okay to hit women? Nobody should be hitting anybody in the first place. Hit back. You can hit back. You shouldn't hit
okay for a woman to hit a man?
What?
Why does feminism say it's okay to hit a man?
Feminism does not say that it's okay to hit a
Okay,
man.
thank you for the questions.
Professor Sheehy.
Okay, we appreciate the questions and the conversation that it resulted in. We do have some questions from downstairs, so we're going to go there. They've been very patient, so I'm trying to give everybody a chance here. And this is a two-part question, Karen. Part one, do you consider yourself pro-man or anti-feminist, whatever? And part two is current legislation are the results of decades of women being abused. Why do you support returning to the past?
Sorry, what was the second part?
It says current legislation is the result of decades of women being abused. Why do you support returning to the past?
I'm not sure how I'm supporting returning to the past. What I'm supporting is that we extend the services and assistance that we currently give female victims to male ones, right? And it's not, we have the system that we have because for decades women were, actually for centuries, really, for millennia, I'm sure, there were women who were abused, okay? There were also men who were abused, and there is documentation of society's reaction and how society would deal with a man who the community discovered his wife was beating him, right? And he would be publicly shamed by being ridden through the town square seated backwards on a donkey while the crowd jeered and threw things at him, right? Or he would be strapped to a cart and have the same thing done, right? It's called the Skimmington Ride, where they would bang pots and pans at him, sometimes when he was in his house, and throw things at his house, because he was allowing himself to be abused by his wife, right? There was no help for him, right? There was marginal sympathy, right? It's not my business, but I feel for you. Maybe I can give you some advice to make it better for women, right? There was no sympathy for men. There still is no sympathy for men who find themselves in that position. And frankly, to say that I'm trying to take us back to the days before battered women's shelters existed, when one of my stories today, one of my anecdotes, was about a personal friend of mine, right? Erin Pitsey, the woman who opened the very first battered women's shelter and who also wanted to open shelters for men, but was blocked at every turn in her efforts by radical feminists. So I guess maybe Danny Boy was right, and feminists believe it is okay for a woman to hit a man. Anyhow, there you go. What question?
I'm from the Ontario Landowners Association. I'm affiliated with them. And we see it, I agree with everything you've said, and I'm a big fan. But we see it as a larger picture of the government going out of its way to destroy human agency.
Mm-hmm.
And men just got hit first.
Oh, because men have always been seen to have more agency.
Yes.
And
that now they're coming after the women too. And you'll see this in rural Ontario or rural anywhere.
Oh yeah, coming after them in what way? Because
by law enforcement, whatever. If you're doing something that is against the norm or against
the rules,
the environment. If you're digging a hole or cutting a tree, or it just tends to happen to be men who are doing that.
Yeah.
But women get in equally as much trouble.
Yeah, no, it's almost like the government has become our freakishly anal retentive homeowners association, right? At the condo complex, where if your grass is this much higher when they stick a ruler in it than it should be, you're going to get fined. So, it just really is, it's amazing how things have gotten to the point where our governments are so intrusive into people's lives, yeah.
What women have to understand is, it took us a long time to get our private property rights.
Mm-hmm.
Government's taking them away.
Oh, yeah, no, it's personal autonomy, all of those things, right? I mean, letting that go for some sense of safety and security is just obscene to me. So yeah, thanks.
Hey, Karen, it's me again.
Hi.
Again, thinking back to Warren Farrell's book, Myth of Male Power, at the outset, he actually spent some time praising the early feminist movement, saying things like, without the women's movement, police forces would not have realized that there were answers to, solving problems without using brute force, that employers would not have experimented with part-time hours and so on and so forth. Now, obviously, he has infinitely more experience than I could ever hope for, so I'm going to defer to his expertise. So, taking his words at face value, in your opinion, where did feminism go wrong?
I've
always wondered about that, especially if
when was the first unfair thing what was the first unfair thing they brought about? Or where did they completely lose their minds?
I guess we'll go with the latter question.
That I think most of that came about. It was already starting in the early half of the 20th century, and mostly in sort of Marxist, socialist kind of groups. And you actually had, I don't know if anybody has heard of E. Belfort Bax or Robert Briffault, but they were socialist Marxists who were very, very vocal about sort of the false veneer of women's weakness and how they have sex privilege, right? And as long as they have sex privilege, right, which is the preferential treatment and all of these things in all of these areas, right, giving them the vote would be a huge mistake, right? That we needed to make sure that things were equalized, right, before we gave women suffrage, right? And of course we didn't do that. Suffrage was actually an extremely unfair, women's suffrage, unfair thing because at the time, in the U.S. anyway, I think it was in 1917, some anarchists brought a court challenge to the Supreme Court, basically saying the draft was unconstitutional. And the Supreme Court justices basically used citizen rights as a justification for why it was constitutional, that when people are granted the rights of citizenship, they have a reciprocal duty to the state to serve when needed. And this is why men were subject to the draft, and it's also why they were subject, if a fire marshal told you to line up and do a bucket brigade, you didn't have a choice, you had to do it. If a police officer commandeered you to help him suppress a crowd or arrest a suspect, you did what you were told, right? That's civil conscription. And women were subject to none of that, right? They did not have to pay for their citizenship rights with any kind of reciprocal obligation. And it was really ironic that that decision came down, and 2 years later, women got the vote, right? And the draft remained in place. So it was just fundamentally unfair in how it happened, and it's still unfair in the U.S., right?
Thanks. Thank you. Just so that there's some order to why I keep interrupting you at random intervals, we're going to take 2 questions here and then 1 from downstairs, okay? So we've had 2, and here's the one from downstairs. As a man of African descent and a teacher, I have experienced the negative effect of the emasculation process that has been going on ever since we came off the slave ships. But no, that has affected white males, but now that has affected white males, it has become an issue. How does race play a role in your movement, and how do you address the issue of privilege when you discuss men's issues?
Okay, one of the things that bugs me about the word privilege is that you actually can apply it to a lot of different things, and I think race is one of them, right? The concept of privilege, that it really is a blessing being born white in many ways in Canada or the U.S. It really is a blessing being born straight, right? But it doesn't quite work that way with gender, right? Because the whole thing with gender is that men and women have always had sort of a balancing set of advantages and disadvantages that sort of complemented each other. Anytime a man was given authority of a woman over a woman under law, there were also laws that protected her from his abuse of that authority, right? It was called coverture. And interestingly enough, when they made those laws gender neutral, women can get into some really sticky situations where they can't sell their own home because their ex lived there and he has a right to live there. And if he doesn't sign away his right, the only person who's allowed to sell the home is the bank, right? So, but that used to exist solely to protect women from husbands who would run off with their secretary or whatever, and then she'd end up on the street, sell the house out from under her, right? So, I mean, there were protections built into the system for women, and there were a balancing set of advantages and disadvantages just based on how we perceive humans, right? You know, we're nicer to women. We respect men more, but we're nicer to women, right? Things like that, or at least that was the case back then. But so it's not a matter of privilege, right? It's not a matter of one gender being privileged over the other, unless you're going to talk about it in terms of privileges, right? And privileges sometimes play out differently in different situations, right? Like it's a privilege to have somebody listen to you and think that you're a person to be taken seriously when you're giving a speech or when you're talking politics, right? But it's another thing to have them take you seriously when you're angry, right? And a bunch of people swarm in because they think you're going to hurt someone when you weren't, right? That's taking you seriously too, right? And women can get away with all kinds of shenanigans simply because no one takes them really seriously. I mean, she couldn't possibly harm anyone. And, so, I mean, like, privilege is just really a difficult thing. As far as how race fits into this movement, I have black men, quite a few of them who message me sort of on a semi-regular basis. And they have often said, we're your canary in the coal mine, right? What's happened to our community is it's already on the way to happening to the white community. And, as far as fatherlessness and unemployment for men and sort of, turning to crime and gangs and drugs and things like that, all of those problems that seem to be really, really entrenched in the black community in the U.S. And so, really, but when you look at a lot of the stuff, right, the unfairness towards men in sentencing, right, the sentencing gap, the women's sentencing discount. Women's sentencing discount is bigger than whites' sentencing discount, right? So it goes white women, white men, black men, right? Yes, black men suffer more, but a good deal, over half of the difference between what sentence they get and what sentence, someone else gets is based on them being male, not just black, but male, right? So, a lot of the things that we talk about, even if we don't specifically mention race, they apply to men of every single race. They apply to men, they apply to gay men, right? They apply to trans men. Even looking at radical feminists who are transphobic, the whole reason is that men can't be trusted, right? And, so a trans woman is like a mole sneaking her way, faking her way into a women's safe space, and she can't be trusted because she'll probably rape someone or something, right? And literally, this is their justification, right? So, we can help with that too, because that's not transphobia. That's actually androphobia, right? That's actually misandry. So, there you go. Anyhow, go ahead.
Hi, I really appreciate all the things you've been saying. Also, thank you for letting me get the close-up. I'm kind of an amateur photographer. Okay, so first of all, every time I tell people, anyone, that I do believe, I am a feminist, I always say that what that means is that I believe in equality. And I believe, so when you say things like, if feminism didn't exist, there would be no change. I feel because these radical feminists, I don't agree with violence of any kind. I hate war. I'm a complete pacifist. I believe that all beings, not even just humans, deserve protection and safety. That's what I believe. And I'm also a feminist because I believe in equality. I believe that regardless of your gender, it's your choice, and that all beings that breathe need safety. So I feel as though your treatment of the word feminism really alienates anyone who identifies themselves as a feminist or even likes anything about feminism, because those radical feminists, feminism is a movement. It has more than just those radical feminists. I would never do anything violent. In fact, I can tell you that I've never, ever harmed any sort of male or female in my entire life, and I identify myself as a feminist. So I feel when you use the word feminist as just a symbol for the radical feminists, you're alienating the population of people that believe in equality and also call themselves feminists. So do you feel that word choice is clever?
Why do you feel an attachment to the word feminism? There are other words: egalitarian, equalist, humanist. Why do you feel an attachment to that word?
Well, it's not just me. It's the entire discourse of women's rights. The word feminist, feminism, is very symbolic.
So why don't you call yourself? It's symbolic of a lot of things, and not all of them are good, right?
That's true. Okay. I agree with that.
But here's the thing. It's a not all feminists are like that argument, right? Not all feminists are like that. Of course, not all feminists are like that, right? But feminism, mainstream feminism, scholarly feminism, right? Academic feminism, right? Movement feminism, right? So feminist organizations, right? Any feminist that matters, right, is going to be like that, right? Unless she's like Camille Paglia, who probably only calls herself a feminist to piss off other feminists, okay? She only does it to piss them off. Because frankly, when a woman says, if women had been in charge through history, we would still be living in grass huts. Okay, that's exactly what she said. And it's because of all of those things that men have done to build and maintain everything that we rely on, right? and the fact that women really don't want to do those jobs, right? The fact that the more free a society gets and the more choices women have, the more they actually gravitate away from having to do any work in the rain outside. You know, like women used to work outside in horrible conditions all the time if they were working class, right? They don't want to do that. I understand that. I don't even want to go outside to have a cigarette, right? Like, so, you know, it's cold, it's crappy out there. Like, why when I could be comfortable, right? But, you know, like, you basically have this huge amalgamous body of people who call themselves feminists, who are the only ones who have any power, right? You have a certain number of power, a certain amount of power. You have the power to call yourself a feminist or not. You have the power to give legitimacy to the people who have power in the movement who call themselves feminists, right? To give them legitimacy because you're a feminist, I'm a feminist, and I'm not like that, right? And you give them moral permission to keep doing what they're doing, right? And so, like, I find it really, really problematic to call yourself something like that. Feminism is not synonymous with women's rights, right? It isn't, right? It just isn't. There are so many other pet projects in there. There are so many other incredibly bizarre philosophies and concepts and theories, actually better called hypotheses, because none of them can be proven. There's no experiment that you could use. And half the things they say, the opposite happens, right? They said gender is socially constructed, right? So what's the prediction from that, right? As I will borrow from Jordan Peterson. The prediction that you would have made 20 years ago is that as society becomes more egalitarian, the differences between men and women will get smaller, right? Say in work choice of career, right? But the opposite has happened. As a society becomes more egalitarian, gender segregation in the workplace gets bigger, not smaller, right? Personality differences get bigger, not smaller, right? So the exact opposite has occurred to what they believe should have occurred, and they won't let go of the theories. They just won't, right? So it's just, I would say to you, it's been poisoned beyond redemption, the word, okay? And that's not your fault, right? But I would maybe consider identifying by another word that means the exact same thing that you believe feminism means, right? Okay? Because, and frankly, this kind of thing comes up all the time whenever somebody's discussing in general, right? Men in general, women in general. Women tend to be more likely to have a reaction that they're saying that I'm like that, right? You know, if you say women are more likely to blah, 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 and women are more likely to take it personally as a statement on them in particular rather than just in general. So that's one of those things that makes me quite valuable, I think, is that I don't do that. I have never felt any compulsion to do that. So people can talk about women in all kinds of negative ways, and I don't think they're talking about me. So there you go.
Just because we are running short on time, we want to squeeze in as much as we can. Can everybody try to make their questions really terse? And I'll ask Karen if she could also try to make her answers. Well, otherwise we're going to run out of time and be kicked out of here. And well, I'm not trying to censor. I just actually want to get more people involved in this.
Drag me kicking and screaming out of
Well, you're the guest.
Oh,
you can treat it however you want.
No, I have to go outside to smoke. Never mind.
There we go. We're all in
Leave
it
willingly.
together to make this happen quickly. We do have a question or some comments from the live streaming that's now up, I understand. Is there a quick question there we can?
You can address either of these. Oh, geez, not going to show on this.
Okay, let's move on. Can you prepare that, Steve? Do we have it? Okay, what's the question?
You can read these, Karen.
Okay, there you go.
Deal with it whatever you want to there.
Can we scroll?
They're over there.
Oh.
Well, they're also.
Yeah, they're. Oh, okay. How does a men's human rights movement keep from becoming as insular as feminism? That would be supporting diversity of opinion and not moderating conversations. I think that would be the best way. This is one of the things that I really like about the men's rights subreddit is that they are not ban happy and not delete happy at all, and you have to pull something really egregious in order to get yourself kicked out for trolling. I mean, like, you gotta go at it hard and heavy for like 6 months before they're like, okay, we are sick of you, get lost. So is there anything positive at all that you can find with feminism today or historically? Of course, there are some positive things. They always just sort of came hand in hand with some negative things. It was a positive thing that maybe, the early feminist lobbyist who convinced family courts to change the custody laws so that it wasn't always the father who got custody, right? But she did not change it so that the best parent got custody. She had it changed so that the mother got custody, and the father was still 100% financially responsible for the child. So I mean, like, yes, that was sort of a good thing, sorta, if it had been done properly, but it wasn't. So I think that's sort of indicative of almost everything that I've read about feminist victories, that they seem fair on the surface, but there's a fundamental unfairness underneath each one. So, all right, next. Oh yeah.
Hi, thank you very. Hello. Sorry. Hi, thank you very much for doing this. I'm sort of new to the men's sort of issues movement, so forgive me if I make any incorrect assumptions. I guess from what I've learned from doing research this week, I guess, is that, on both sides, there are radical groups and there are reasonable groups, there are radical anti-feminist groups on the men's side, there are radical anti-male groups on the female side. But there are those reasonable groups out there that ultimately advocate for their, for issues that are specifically relate to men and women. My question is, in sort of terms of dealing with equality, which is, I guess, the most important issue for both genders, how do you bridge the gap and create a dialogue between these two reasonable groups in order to discuss what I think is really the most important issue?
Okay, well, one thing that always surprised me, because we do have a lot of criticism about our radicals, right? And A Voice for Men takes a lot of criticism over being brash and outspoken and not pulling punches when it comes to criticizing women or feminists or society or traditionalists, often conservatives. People are like, they're so angry and misogynistic and radical. And I'm thinking, like, none of them have called for the genocide of women. I know numerous radical feminist websites that talk openly about, reducing the population of men down to maybe 5-10% of the population, right? And figuring out ways to do that. And the thing is that they tend to talk really politely, right? They tend to care about their tone, and they talk very reasonably. And one of the things that I think that you might not realize is that as far as anti-feminists go, I'm about as radical as you can get, right? And I don't come across as radical, right? And it's because I'm not a very hostile, shouty, angry person. And so I think more... it's more about how the ideas are expressed. I have pretty extreme views, right? Pretty extreme views, and yet I don't get half the guff over my views that most men who would say the exact same thing get. So, I mean, how do you bridge a gap between the moderates? I don't know. I don't know that bridging the gap between the moderates or compromising is necessarily the best thing to do, because if you have position A and position B and one is correct and one is incorrect, right, the point in the middle is not the correct answer, right? So yes, we do have to negotiate who's correct and who's not, who's in the right and who's in the wrong, but that doesn't mean that we're going to meet in the middle and we're going to do half the things this way and half the things. It's just a very difficult situation. It will be up to moderates to come together. It's kind of the way I liken it to society accepted Martin Luther King because they were scared of Malcolm X, right? They were terrified of him. So maybe we need the radicals to even get people to listen to the moderates. And frankly, the fact that A Voice for Men gets picked on for being radical all the time, they're the ones who ended up profiled by 2020, right? They're the ones who get into the mainstream news, right? They're the ones who bring people to have a look at what we're saying, what the moderates are saying. So they're responsible for a lot of the exposure that we've had over the last several years, right? Moderates like Cafe get to benefit from the interest. So there you go.
Thank you very much.
Go ahead.
Yeah, I'd just like to ask your view on, you must get this not all feminists are like that argument all the time.
Oh, yeah.
And I'd just like to say, like, it seems to be as if, as an ideology, feminism can kind of shapeshift or wear costumes. Is it, how do you define moderates now when probably the most likely next president will be Hillary Clinton, who is quoted as saying, women are the primary victims of war when the men are dying.
Because the men are dying.
Or is Professor Sheehy in Ottawa, is she a moderate, lobbying for the right for women to murder their husbands or elect themselves judge, jury, and executioner on just claims?
I actually think she said something about how it was not just a moral right, but it might even be a moral responsibility for her to do that.
So where does who is the moderate if you have people in institutions and the next likely president of the United States saying things like that? Where are the moderates if that's the view?
They're being quiet. They're calling themselves feminists, but they're not saying too much more. And they, here's the one thing about democracy that makes it sort of the worst system ever, except for all the others, is that the moment that you tell people that they can vote themselves entitlements, right, they're going to do it. And right now, government is much more interested in offering entitlements to women, right? Like, men will vote themselves entitlements as well. They're just not offered as many by the government, right? And so, yeah, I think Hillary Clinton's going to get in. It's going to be a very, she can't be worse than Obama on feminist issues, so, maybe she'll sign into the law, the Paycheck Fairness Act, and then we can all just go blow our own brains out because it's all over. But,
is there a solution to that problem? Like, if the frame and the narrative is constantly changing that not all feminists are like that, when you have institutionalized feminism saying things like that,
it's sword fighting the fart, right? You're not going to get anywhere, right? So, it's they can point to every single thing that is perceived as good that feminism had even a remote hand in, right? And say, this is why feminism is good. All feminists are like that, right? Like, this is feminism. This is the feminist movement did that, right? And the moment there's something bad or someone says anything even a little bit critical, then it's, we don't actually have anything to do with those ladies, right? Oh, I can't believe what they're doing either. What, you want me to go tell them to stop? Oh, I couldn't, right? So, I mean, that's what we're up against because it doesn't have, it's not a political party, right? So it doesn't have a leader that you can hold accountable, and it doesn't have a staff and a bureaucracy that you can deal with that has a list of agreed on policies and stuff like that. It's impossible. It's impossible to fight it without just really, really, really hammering it, right? Like, it's like I said, it's very difficult to reason with any of them. So, go ahead.
But we did take two, so if you don't mind, just so I can stick to the rule and not be accused of somehow manipulating things later. Here's the question downstairs. Margaret Mead said the opposite of patriarchy is not matriarchy, but fraternity. Is there a process where men and women work together to a greater good?
Well, of course, but I don't know that we've stumbled on it yet. The opposite of patriarchy is not matriarchy. One of the reasons why Margaret Mead said that is that she had studied a few different sort of hunter-gatherer societies, and she had described them in her writing in some highly gendered, subversive ways, right? The men were effete, and their hair was ornately done. Hi, Nick. and they were very concerned with their appearance and stuff like that. And the women were, they looked after the children with this camaraderie, right? Almost brother, And so people jumped on that and said, she's found the first matriarchal society where the roles are reversed, right? But it was still the men looked good when they went hunting, and the women were comrade-like when they were breastfeeding their babies, right? And changing the diapers, right? It was not a gender-neutral or a reverse role society at all. But people, she's corrected that. She corrected that something like 100 times publicly over 50 years. Yeah, actually, I never actually said that this was a gender, but people wanted to think that it was possible. And they ran with it and spread like wildfire, and now it's like the Super Bowl domestic violence hoax. It'll never go away. So, and that's one reason why she said that. But I don't know what the system is. I really don't. I think that women have to be active participants, but I think that when men start talking about their experiences and their lives and stuff like that, the moment you feel an urge to completely dismiss what they're saying, right, is the moment you need to step back and take a break and come back, into the movement later, because a man's telling you his truth, right? And who are you to say that his truth is completely invalid? I don't even do that with male feminists, although I do call them names, so. All right, go ahead.
Hi. So I wanted to go back to something that you had mentioned a bit earlier, and I know that the topic of males in teaching roles and males in nursing roles, and why it's predominantly female, I guess, oriented, and I kind of wanted to reverse that and also talk about how we look at medical professionals and how we look at engineers and how we look at a lot of the sciences, and how we don't necessarily see as many women in those roles. And one of my big concerns is how does the men's rights movement really address those structural things? Because I feel like the feminist analysis at least kind of looks at that and looks at gender conformity and the way that people are taught and that things are society learned. And I don't necessarily see that same analysis that will actually move both genders forward.
Okay, but you're getting down to the social construction argument again, right? Gender is a social construct. Gender is socially constructed, right? It's not biological. I guarantee you that part of it is socially constructed, right? But I've seen enough research to convince me that nature sort of makes you the way you are, and not every boy is going to be the same, not every girl is going to be the same, right? And then society either pushes back against that or encourages it to continue, or to get more, to have more of an effect, right? So the idea that there's some kind of structural barrier to women being in medicine, right? Look at it. Biologists, lots of women there. Med students, I think they're about half, maybe more than half women right now, right? Women are people-oriented, more likely to be people-oriented than men, right? And men are more likely to be thing-oriented than women. So it's the dry sciences, it's the thing sciences, where you aren't dealing with people. When you're a doctor, you're dealing with people all the time, right? When you're a biologist, you're studying life, you're studying, living things, right? When you are a chemist, not so much, right? When you're an engineer, really not so much, although there are a couple of, I guess maybe if you wanted to design playgrounds or something like that. But there's very, very little interaction with people in those particular sciences and mathematics and things like that. They're very, very dry subjects. There's very little humanity in them. And women don't seem to be that interested in those things. And they tried to get more women in chemistry in the UK, right? They tried with basically lowering the standards for women and having a quota system, right? And in entry into that particular program, right? And so if 100 men applied and 50 women applied, you could only take half the men and you would have to take all the women, right? And what ended up happening at several universities in the UK was they ended up closing down chemistry departments because too many students, mostly women, transferred out of the program because they didn't like it, right? And then they went into psychology or something like that was more interesting to them. And then those departments weren't graduating enough students, and so they actually closed down programs at several universities. And is that lack of female chemists now caused by gender discrimination against women who want to get in, or is this entire debacle now caused by positive discrimination in women's favor and discrimination that against men that denies them opportunities that they otherwise would have had? So, you know, you can go with your social construct angle, but I don't think it's really going to get you anywhere. Like I said, the most egalitarian countries in the world, in Scandinavia, have more gender segregation in the workplace than China does. So
I'm kind of also then wondering, like, what's your analysis between the difference between gender and sex? Like,
well, sex is your biological, basically your DNA. Gender is how you present your sex.
okay, because
Right.
I think that there was some conflation between, like, you switching between gender and sex in that last analysis.
Well, but people who are of a specific sex have gender qualities that are sometimes innate and express themselves, right? The behavioral propensities, interests, they even traced it back to newborns, right? Newborn boys, 1 day old, will look longer at a mechanical object than a face, and newborn girls will look longer at a face than a mechanical object. I mean, these are just things that are there. And you have to get to a point where you ask, what are we doing? If people just naturally want to be this way, and if women in Sweden are happier to go into nursing than engineering, why are we trying to push them into doing something that doesn't interest them, right? Why are we trying to push men into, going into a field that they don't want to do, right? I don't want to have affirmative action and all kinds of incentives to get men into nursing or even teaching, even though teaching, it's important to me that we get more men in teaching. I don't think we should be pushing either way. Give people their own choices. Who cares if some of the socialization that they received when they were younger influences those choices, right? You ask, are they happy with what they're doing with their life, or are they not, right? And if they're happy, then what injustice has been done, right? Like, I
just also find it kind of ironic that you've been kind of going on a tirade a bit against, not social programs, but more of the kind of Marxist, socialist kind of angle, and you're referencing Scandinavian countries right now. So I find that a little ironic.
Well, okay.
The truth is ironic.
Please.
Hello, my overlord. I'm sorry, he's the leader of the Patriarchy Party, and the last place candidate in the Ward 8 election in Edmonton. So, but he fought a good fight. 480 people in that ward had a sense of humor. So
484 or 448 rather.
Oh. No. Bummer. All right.
Just this is coming back to the not all feminists are like that thing. Now, if hypothetically there because it has to be a hypothetical. If there were feminist organizations that stood for all the same typical feminist talking points, patriarchy, wage gap, rape culture, all those things, but on paper, but if they stood and roundly condemned the violence of the U of T protesters at the Warren Farrell lecture, or if any of them actually pushed for legislation that would grant infants the same right to genital integrity that we grant girls,
yep.
Which has been, we've granted it to them since 1997, would you then concede that not all feminists are like that? If there were organizations that would stand up and point at these existing feminist organizations that did things like perpetrate violence at protests or tell lies about, I don't know, you and me.
Oh, well. But it's flattering that they do, that
Yes.
they care enough.
But if there were someone who would condemn those incredibly unethical actions, would you still then take the stance that all feminists were like that?
Well, I would take the stand that all feminists hold a common worldview. I mean, like, here's the thing, right? as much as they might condemn the actions of protesters that are violent and intimidating and all of that other stuff, they still believe the fundamental things that cause those protesters to behave that way, right? It's basically like I believe that Christ is the Son of God and He died for our sins. I could be a member of the most moderate church out there, or I could be someone from the Westboro Baptist Church, right? We hold that common belief and several other common axioms to be true, right? Not that I'm actually a Christian, but I was just using it as an example. But, so all feminists are like that in one way or another, right? They all have lots of things in common. So, I guess I could say they're not all like screamy and violent, but some of them say the most atrociously horrible things in a very polite tone. So I'm pretty sure Professor Sheehy was very moderated in her tone when she wrote that book. So, there you go. Okay, any more?
We're told we're going to have to wrap it up, so
All
I'm
right.
going to take one last question. We're going to have to do this quickly. Oh, we're done here. Excellent. One last question from the remote folks, and then one from the overflow folks. I'm sorry, I know there's a few downstairs. We'll be around wrapping up. You can come up and talk to us and Karen, those of you downstairs who don't get to ask your question, or others who didn't get to. What's the question from these guys?
Okay, what is the most important men's issue and why? I would actually think that maybe that would be, because there's a lot of big issues, the gender empathy gap, right? That we acknowledge that women have feelings. We acknowledge that women can suffer harm. When they do, it makes us feel, as I have said, a little bit hurty inside. We don't feel a whole lot of those things for men. Maybe for a man who's suffering something that doesn't have anything to do with being a man, like maybe got cancer or whatever, got hit by a car. But we don't feel sympathy for men in any kind of issue that they're having with women, and or when compared to women. It's probably the primary thing that drives most men's problems in society today. What can the average person do to further human rights? Talk about them. I actually stunned the former leader of the Wild Rose Party in Alberta a couple of weeks ago by telling him, I don't even vote, right? I don't see it as something that really does a whole lot of good. How many people are voting? I'm one of them. I know how many people share my opinion on how things should run, and I bet there's 10 whole people like that in my province. Voting is an exercise in futility for somebody like me. So talk. What's a good example of a right that women have that men don't have? The right to genital integrity. The right to refuse to consent to the obligations of parenthood. Those are two. So, there you go.
Sorry, and last question, and I apologize for those who didn't get to ask any. Is CAFE offering or providing any support to Gregory Allen Elliott? Is this legal case precedent setting, or is there a previous case law? Maybe you could just give them a brief remark on what that's referring to.
Okay, Gregory Allen Elliott is the Twitter harasser. And I don't know that CAFE is involved in his case in any way. I don't know that, a Voice for Men, they get involved in some legal cases, but they are really, really choosy about which ones they pick. And I think actually it could be precedent setting, right? And so if Mr. Elliott is convicted, it is really bad news for people like me. Right? Really seriously bad news, because all of a sudden now I can be charged for arguing a point with somebody, right? And it's very, very, very easy for a young, pretty woman to convince the authorities that she's really scared, And so, I mean, like this is just something that I'm hoping, I'd pray if I believed in doing that, that he is acquitted. because if he isn't, we're all in big trouble. So.
Please join me in thanking Karen Straughan. It's been an amazing night.